All right, so you want to know about the Panama Canal expansion, huh? Well, strap in for Explain This to Me, the show that tackles those burning questions you've got. Today we're diving deep into a listener request about, well, a pretty epic engineering project. That's right, we're talking about the Panama Canal expansion.
Big project, that's for sure.
So we've got reports, studies, even firsthand accounts, all about this massive undertaking.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. We're on a mission to figure out how they actually pulled this off, what kind of impact it had, and maybe even uncover some juicy behind-the-scenes tidbits along the way. And to help us navigate this whole thing, we've got a bona fide expert who can break down these crazy, complicated engineering feats like it's nothing.
I'll do my best. I'm no miracle worker, but I can definitely shed some light on things.
Perfect. Now, before we even get into the nitty-gritty of the expansion, let's take a step back, kind of set the stage. Why was this project even necessary in the first place?
Good question.
Our sources paint a picture of a Panama Canal that was struggling. Big time. It was like trying to cram a whole bunch of stuff into a tiny little box.
Yeah, it was definitely bursting at the seams. Think of it like rush hour, but on like a global scale. Imagine a superhighway, but it's operating at full capacity, 24/7, nonstop. And you've got traffic jams stretching as far as the eye can see.
Yikes. So that was the Panama Canal before they expanded it.
Pretty much. Ships were facing crazy delays. We're talking like up to a week, sometimes even longer.
A week? Oof, that's like missing your connecting flight and then some.
Right. It was a mess. But you gotta wonder, why this sudden bottleneck? Was it just because there was more stuff being shipped around the world?
Yeah, what was the deal?
Well, global trade definitely played a role, no doubt about that. But there's another key factor here, and it's the rise of these, well, they're called post-Panamax ships.
Post-Panamax ships, what are those?
These are like the behemoths of the sea. They absolutely dwarf the ships that the original canal was designed to handle. We're talking vessels longer than the Eiffel Tower is tall.
Whoa, hold on. Seriously, longer than the Eiffel Tower, that's insane.
No joke, it's like trying to squeeze a monster truck through a doorway built for a Mini Cooper. Just doesn't work.
So the canal had a serious size issue. It wasn't just about more ships, but bigger ships needing to get through.
Exactly, and that's what made the expansion so necessary.
Okay, that makes total sense. But how do you even begin to tackle a problem that massive? I mean, expanding the Panama Canal, that sounds like a monumental task.
It was. The solution was bold, ambitious. I mean, it was basically a complete transformation of the canal.
Laid it on me. What'd they do?
They added a third lane with bigger locks.
A third lane. Wow. Sounds like they basically built a whole new canal alongside the old one.
In a way, yeah. They had to build entire new lock complexes on both the Atlantic and Pacific sides, excavate new channels, widen and deepen existing ones. They even had to raise the water level of Gatun Lake.
Hold up. Back up a second. They messed with the whole lake for this project.
Gatun Lake is artificial, actually. It was created by damming the Chagres River, and it plays a super crucial role in how the canal works.
Oh, I see.
By raising the lake's level, they increased its water storage capacity. And you need a ton of water to run a canal, especially one with 3 lanes.
Right, because every time a ship goes through a lock, they use millions of gallons of water to raise and lower it.
Exactly. It's like filling and emptying a giant bathtub over and over and over again. But they came up with some pretty clever ways to save water during the process.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they incorporated something called water-saving basins into the new locks.
Water-saving basins?
They're amazing. Basically, they act like giant water recycling units.
That sounds pretty high-tech. How do they work?
Okay, imagine you have this huge container of water, right? And you need to lower the water level to let a ship out. Instead of just draining all that water away, these basins capture and store it at different levels. Then, when they need to raise a ship, they use that stored water.
So it's like recycling the water.
Exactly. They don't have to draw as much fresh water from Gatun Lake, which is really important, especially in Panama, where they have those dry seasons.
But they're not putting as much strain on the water resources? That's really smart.
It is, and it's just one example of the mind-blowing engineering that went into this whole project.
Well, I'm reading here about the new lock chambers. They're huge, longer, wider, and deeper than the originals. Makes sense, I guess, if you're trying to fit those massive post-Panamax ships through.
They had to make room. And it's not just about size, they used some cutting-edge tech, too.
Like what?
Well, they switched from traditional miter gates, you know, the ones that swing open and close like doors, to these massive rolling gates.
Oh, wow, I can picture
They
that.
slide back and forth, much more efficient for locks that size.
So they took the best ideas from old and new engineering and combine them to create something incredible.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know, I was reading that they actually reused areas that were excavated back in the 1930s for these new locks. Yeah. It's like history coming full circle in the name of progress.
That's pretty cool. It shows you just how much engineering ingenuity has gone into the Panama Canal over the years. But we can't forget about the cost. And I'm not just talking about, a few extra bucks here and there.
I bet. I mean, expanding the Panama Canal, that couldn't have been cheap.
Oh, no, not at all. The initial estimate was, get this, $5.25 billion.
$5.25 billion. Wow.
And that covered everything. Design, construction, environmental mitigation, the whole 9 yards.
That's a lot of dough.
Yeah, it's a hefty sum by anyone's standards. And the financing model was actually designed to keep it separate from the Panamanian government's budget.
Oh, really? So it's like a separate entity?
Pretty much. They didn't want to risk the entire country's financial well-being on the success of the expansion. It was a smart move.
Definitely. But still, where did they get all that money from?
They secured loans from all sorts of places. International institutions like the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, the European Investment Bank, even the Inter-American Development Bank.
So this is a truly global effort, not just in terms of the ships that would use the canal, but in the financial support that made it all possible.
Precisely. And it really highlights how interconnected the global economy really is.
It wasn't just Panama's project, it was the world's project.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this massive project, a global effort, billions of dollars poured into it. But did it actually pay off? That's the big question.
That's what we're here to find out.
We'll dive into that and a whole lot more after the break. Stick around. We'll be right back. All right, we're back, and we're ready to dive headfirst into the impact of the Panama Canal expansion. Last time, we left things with, well, a pretty hefty price tag. But the real question is, did all that investment actually pay off? What happened when they finally opened those huge new locks?
Things got interesting. Because a project this big, it doesn't just affect shipping lanes, it has a ripple effect on the whole country, even the world.
Yeah, the ripple effects. Jobs, the environment, the whole 9 yards. So let's start with the economics. Did this expansion actually live up to all the hype? Did it create a boom for Panama?
One of the biggest immediate impacts, and it was a pretty controversial one, was on employment.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
When you're talking about a project of that scale, there's bound to be a ton of jobs involved.
Absolutely. The Panama Canal Authority, the ACP, they projected that the expansion would create somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 new jobs, just during construction.
Whoa, that's a lot of jobs. But I'm guessing not everyone bought those numbers.
You're right. A lot of critics argued those projections were, well, maybe a little inflated.
How so?
They pointed out that many of the jobs would be temporary. They'd disappear once the construction was done. Poof, gone.
So was it just a temporary boost then? Or did the expansion have a more lasting impact on jobs in Panama?
That's where things get a little more complicated. The ACP, they insisted the real impact would be felt over the long term.
Meaning?
Well, their argument was that the expanded canal would bring in more traffic, which means more revenue, and ultimately that would stimulate economic growth across different sectors.
More ships, more money flowing through Panama, more jobs, not just at the canal, but in other industries too. Tourism, logistics, all that.
Exactly. A kind of chain reaction. They called it a multiplier effect, with the canal as the engine driving broader economic development.
I like that. Multiplier effect. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows.
Right. And to their credit, the ACP acknowledged this. They knew a comprehensive social development plan had to go hand in hand with the expansion.
Because creating jobs is one thing, but making sure those jobs are actually good jobs, that they benefit a lot of people, that the wealth is spread around, that's a whole other challenge.
Exactly. It's about lifting up communities, not just profits. It raises a really important question, actually. Who really benefits from these kinds of mega projects? Are the gains shared, or do they end up concentrated in the hands of a few?
Big questions, and ones that are worth asking. Okay, so we've talked about the economic hopes, but we can't ignore the environmental side of things. How did they balance all this development with protecting Panama's natural resources?
Yeah, that was a big one, and the ACP knew it. They acknowledged that a project of this scale would inevitably have an impact on the environment, but they insisted that any potential harm could be minimized through careful planning, and strict environmental safeguards.
So they were trying to be environmentally conscious. But did that satisfy everyone?
Of course not. There were, and still are, valid concerns, especially when you're talking about such a delicate ecosystem.
Like what? What were some of the biggest worries?
Well, one of the major concerns was about Gukhoon Lake, and for good reason.
Yeah, it's not just crucial for the canal, it's a vital source of drinking water for Panama City. Mixing salt water into that equation would be a disaster.
Absolutely. And some critics, scientists, environmental groups, they were skeptical of the ACP's plans to prevent that from happening.
Prevent salinization, you mean?
Right. They pointed to studies suggesting those water-saving basins, while great for conserving water, might actually increase the risk of saltwater intrusion.
Oh, wow. So it's like a double-edged sword. On one hand, you've got the economic benefits, the need to conserve fresh water. On the other hand, you're potentially putting a drinking water source at risk.
Exactly. It's a tough balancing act. And it wasn't just about Gaytun Lake. There were concerns about the impact on biodiversity, deforestation from all the digging, disruption of ecosystems throughout the canal zone.
A lot of valid points, both for and against the expansion. So how do you even begin to weigh those competing interests? How do you balance economic growth with protecting the environment and making sure things are socially equitable?
It's a question without easy answers. It's something every big infrastructure project has to grapple with. The Panama Canal expansion was no different.
We've talked about the hopes, the concerns, the complexities. We've seen the potential benefits and maybe some unintended consequences. But what does it all mean in the grand scheme of things? What's the legacy of this project? We'll try to answer that question right after the break. And we're back. Time to wrap up our Panama Canal expansion deep dive. So we've seen the engineering, the economics, the environmental concerns. Big question now, I guess, is what's the takeaway? Was this whole thing a success, a big mistake, or somewhere in between?
It'd be easy to just try to slap a label on it, success or failure, but it's way more complicated than that. This project, it's had a huge impact on Panama, global trade, how we think about these massive infrastructure projects.
Yeah, we've heard from people who are excited, all about the economic growth, the jobs, but we also heard from those who were worried, about the social and environmental costs. And it's hard to see how those viewpoints fit together.
And that's the thing, right? You've got all these competing interests, valid concerns on all sides. What really matters is making sure those voices are heard, that they're part of the decision-making process. That's what real progress is about. Not just building bigger and better, but building responsibly.
So it's not just about the engineering, the economics, the environmental checks and balances. It's about open conversation, acknowledging the trade-offs, finding solutions that work for everyone.
Absolutely. Transparency, communication, listening to different perspectives. That's what responsible development looks like. And those are lessons we can take from this project, lessons that go way beyond Panama.
We started this whole thing with a listener asking us to explain this to me. And I think we've uncovered a lot more than just how to widen a canal. We've seen how economics, engineering, politics, the environment, they're all intertwined.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? A project designed to connect the world can also show us where the cracks are.
Right. But maybe those cracks are where we learn the most. So to our listener who sent in the question, I hope we gave you a lot to think about. And for everyone listening, keep digging. The Panama Canal story isn't over. It's still evolving, still shaping global trade, and it's still raising those big questions about progress, responsibility, our future.
It really is. The Panama Canal, it's a testament to what humans can do, our ambition, our ingenuity. But it's also a reminder that progress without thinking about the wider impact, well, that can backfire. And figuring out how to balance those things, well, that's something we're all still working on.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up, but the conversation doesn't have to end here. What parts of this story stuck with you? What questions are you still thinking about? Let us know. We always love hearing from you. Keep those brains working and keep those questions coming. Thanks for joining us on Explain This to Me. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep exploring.